The stadium roars differently than usual. It's not just the normal noise of fans waiting for the kickoff. It's a deep, vibrating tension that travels from the stands down to the turf. The lights dim, smoke starts pouring from the tunnel, and spotlights cut through the darkness like knives. In that moment, the entrance to the stadium's depths opens and out sprints a figure the whole city knows by heart. Not a quarterback, not the guy who holds the ball. A linebacker, a defender, a man whose job is to stop anything that moves. Ray Lewis. He throws his arms wide, tilts his head back, and starts his iconic pregame dance. It isn't a show for the cameras. It's a ritual. Every step, every body movement, every shout is part of something bigger. The energy coming off him isn't acted. It's real. Teammates stand around him and soak it in. Fans lose their minds. And the opponents, they know that today, they're going to have to run through a wall. When he reaches the defense, he stops, he looks every man in the eyes, and then he screams. Not a normal chantant eruption that sounds like a challenge, like a promise, like a warning. Ray Lewis wasn't just a player. He was the heart of the defense. He was the voice of the locker room. He was the face of a city's identity, one built on toughness and loyalty. But his story isn't only about energy, trophies, and Super Bowls. It isn't just the story of a dominant linebacker who wrote his name among the greatest defenders in NFL history. It's a story of a fall, a story of controversy that could have destroyed everything, a story of a man who ended up on the line between legend and oblivion, and that's exactly why it hit so hard. Before he became the symbol of the Baltimore Ravens, before he lifted the Lombardi Trophy and was named Super Bowl MVP, he was just a kid from Florida, a kid who grew up without a stable father in a world where weakness wasn't tolerated. He was born on May 15, 1975, in Bartow. His childhood wasn't easy. His father was violent and didn't stay with the family for long. His mother had to work multiple jobs to feed the kids. Ray, as the oldest son, quickly understood that the world doesn't come with guarantees, that nobody gives you anything for free, and that if he wanted to change something, he had to be stronger than his circumstances. Home wasn't a place of peace. It was a place of survival. Every day meant responsibility, helping with his younger siblings, protecting the family. Growing up without a father planted a quiet anger in him that he carried for a long time. Not the uncontrolled, explosive kind. A deep, directed anger. An anger that slowly turned into fuel. Sports became his escape. On the field, he could let that pressure out. Out there were rules, another kind of order. Strength and discipline meant something. In high school in Lakeland, he started to stand out not only in football, but also in wrestling. And it was the combination of those two sports that began shaping the player that NFL would one day know as one of the toughest defenders of his era. Even then, it was clear he wasn't just talented, he was obsessed with preparation. He stayed after practice longer than everyone else. He studied the game. He sharpened his technique. He was smaller than some opponents, but faster, smarter, more aggressive. He knew that if he couldn't be the biggest, he had to be the most prepared. His mentality was born long before the NFL. It was built out of the feeling that he had to fight for every inch, every opportunity, every ounce of respect. When he got to the University of Miami, he stepped into one of the toughest college football programs in the country. Miami was known for speed, aggression, and swagger. It was an environment where only the mentally strongest survived, and Ray Lewis fit in perfectly. He quickly earned a spot in the starting lineup. He wasn't the biggest linebacker on the field, but he had instinct. He could read offenses before the snap. He moved with unbelievable certainty. Every tackle was hard, clean, and authoritative. Teammates noticed that when he spoke, others listened not because he yelled the loudest, but because he believed every word. At Miami, his style was born, a mix of faith, discipline, and intensity. He started becoming the voice of the defense, the kind of player who could change a game's momentum with a single hit. Step by step, the talented young guy turned into a leader, and when he decided to enter the NFL draft after his third year, he knew his journey was only beginning, not as a star, not as a guaranteed top pick, but as a man ready to prove he belonged among the best. Nobody back then knew he would become the face of an entire organization, that his name would one day be inseparable from the identity of the Baltimore Ravens, and absolutely nobody knew how a dark chapter would arrive just a few years later. But that's what makes his story so powerful. He didn't grow up a legend. He grew up a fighter, When he entered the draft in 1996, there wasn't the same hype around him as there was around future offensive stars. He wasn't a quarterback expected to change the scoreboard every drive. He wasn't a wide receiver selling jerseys before his first snap. He was a linebacker or defensive player, a position fans often only notice when he makes a mistake. And yet, that's exactly when a story began, one that would be tied to a single organization forever. In 1996, the Baltimore Ravens selected him 26th overall. It was a new franchise still finding itself, a club without history, without an identity, without tradition, and that symbolism mattered. Ray Lewis didn't walk into a finished system. He was meant to be part of building it. From day one, he felt different. He wasn't a rookie quietly waiting for a chance. He studied the playbook, analyzed opponents' offenses, talked with veteran players, watched every detail. His approach was obsessive. He wanted to understand the game deeply, not just react, but anticipate. Even in his rookie season, he showed he had something extra: speed, instinct, the ability to always be where the game breaks open, and most of all, the voice. A defense needs communication. It needs someone to set the tempo. And even as a young player, he started taking responsibility. Step by step, he built respect, not through media talk, through violent, clean hits. Every tackle was a statement. Every collision was personal. He wasn't the biggest linebacker in the league, but he played with such intensity that he seemed bigger than he actually was. He began studying opponents with a chess player's precision. He recognized formations, read the movement of the offensive line, reacted a fraction of a second faster than everyone else. In the NFL, where inches decide everything, that meant everything. Season after season, he grew. The stats climbed: tackles, forced fumbles, huge moments in key situations. But even more important was the change in the team's identity. Baltimore started becoming synonymous with toughness. Defense became their signature, and Ray Lewis became its face. By the end of the 90s, he wasn't just a solid starter anymore. He was the captain, the man the defense was built around. His preparation became legendary. He arrived at the training facility among the first and left among the last. He paid attention to details others overlooked. He spoke about faith, about responsibility, about how defense isn't only about physical strength, but about discipline and trust. Teammates said that when he spoke before a game, they felt they had to play beyond their limits. A team that had only recently been without identity began to develop character, and that character carried his voice. As the 2000 season approached, Baltimore was no longer just a new team trying to survive. A defense was forming, one with the potential to be exceptional, and at the center of it stood Ray Lewis, more mature, stronger, more experienced. He had no idea the year would bring the things that would change his life forever, one on the field and one off it, and both would carry enormous weight. The year 2000 was supposed to be the peak of Ray Lewis's athletic prime. Baltimore's defense was getting stronger, the team was maturing, and he was in the best years of his career. But before the season could fully unfold, a night came that changed everything. Atlanta. A January night after Super Bowl 34, the city was filled with players, agents, celebrities. An evening meant to celebrate football turned into chaos within minutes. Outside a nightclub, a confrontation broke out. Shouting, confusion, a fight, and then knives. Two young men were left dead on the ground. Ray Lewis was there. He was part of the group moving through the night. Police soon charged him with murder and obstruction. Suddenly, the captain of a defense became the headline of every media outlet. Television replayed his pregame screams alongside footage of police escorts. Commentators debated whether his career was over. The NFL, the fans, the entire United States watched to see what would happen next. The trial was brutal. The charges were severe. He faced the possibility of life in prison. His name, once meant to be associated with tactics and leadership, now appeared next to the word murder. For a moment, it seemed like everything he had built since childhood was collapsing. In the end, a deal was reached. The murder charges were dropped in exchange for his testimony against the other men, who were later acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. Lewis pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and received probation and a league fine. Legally, the case was closed. Publicly, never completely. For many people, a shadow remained, a question mark that would stay attached to his name forever. And yet this is where the psychological layer of his story truly begins. He returned to the team, to the locker room, to an environment where respect isn't built from headlines, but from performance. Teammates watched him. Fans were divided. Media waited for a mistake. Instead, he began playing the best football of his life, as if he carried all that tension onto the field with him. Every tackle was harder, every collision more intense. This was no longer only about the game. It was about identity, about who he would become, about whether one night would define him or years of work. The 2000 season became legendary. Baltimore's defense was brutal, disciplined, historically dominant, and at its center stood Ray Lewis, a man who, just months earlier, had faced murder charges. His performances were more than statistics. They were an answer, quiet but unmistakable. Not through interviews, through play pressure that would have broken many players became motivation for him. In every game, he looked like someone trying to prove something, maybe to the world, maybe to himself. That night in Atlanta could have consumed him. Instead, it became a turning point, not an ending, but the moment his story split into before and after. And that after would go on to change NFL history. The 2000 season wasn't just good. It wasn't just above average. It was historic. The Baltimore Ravens defense became something people still talk about today. The numbers began to speak for themselves. The fewest points allowed in a 16-game regular season. Opponents looked helpless against them. Offenses that normally scored 30 points could barely reach 10. And in the middle of it all stood Ray Lewis. He wasn't just another piece of the defensive line. He was its brain, its conductor. Every snap began with his communication. He read formations, shifted teammates, adjusted coverage based on the opponent's movement. He had the ability to recognize a running play before it even developed. He reacted a fraction of a second faster than everyone else in the NFL. That fraction decides everything. His tackling was clean, violent, authoritative. They weren't just stops, they were statements. When he brought someone down, the opponent felt not only the impact, but the message. This is where it ends. The Ravens' defense played with near military discipline. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew that if they made a mistake, Lewis would be the first to analyze it, not with ego-driven shouting, but with a demand for perfection. His standard was high, and anyone who didn't meet it had no place on the field. The playoffs confirmed this wasn't luck. The team advanced game after game. The offense wasn't the league's most explosive. Often, scoring just a little was enough because the defense allowed almost nothing. In every crucial moment, number 52 appeared. In every key third down situation, he was there. And then came Super Bowl 35, the game that would decide whether this defense was only a seasonal anomaly or truly one of the greatest in history. The opponent, the New York Giants. A battle was expected. Instead, dominance arrived. The Ravens won 30 for 2-7. The defense dictated the tempo from the first snap. Lewis was everywhere, stopping runs, covering passes, organizing the game. It wasn't only a physical victory, it was a mental dismantling of the opponent. At the end of the game, he was named Super Bowl MVP. For many, it was a moment of redemption. Just a year earlier, his life had been uncertain. Now he held the greatest trophy in American football, the symbol of the sport's ultimate peak. But perhaps even more important than the title itself was something else. The birth of a leader. Ray Lewis wasn't a captain just by title. He was one by natural authority. His locker room speeches were filled with faith, passion, and intensity. He spoke about responsibility, about family, about sacrifice. Players said that when he spoke before a game, they felt they had to perform beyond their limits. He wasn't a quiet kind of leader. He was emotional, loud, open. Some loved him, others thought he was too much, but no one ignored him. His energy became part of the Ravens' identity. Toughness, discipline, relentlessness, all of it carried his face. The 2000 season didn't create him, but it defined him. From a player earning respect, he became a symbol. From the captain of a defense, he became one of the most powerful leaders in the entire league, and his story was far from over. After the Super Bowl, Ray Lewis didn't become only a champion. He became a reference point, the player by whom the intensity of the entire defense was measured. But the 2000 title wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of an era in which he became a true leader, not just a captain on paper, but the man who defined the culture of the team. In the locker room, he held a unique position. He wasn't the quietest voice, and he certainly wasn't the calmest. His pregame speeches were filled with emotion, faith, and dramatic tension. He spoke about responsibility, about sacrifice, about how every snap could be the last. Some players said that when he stood in front of them and spoke, it felt like they were going to war. and that was exactly what he wanted. His leadership wasn't only about shouting, it was about preparation. He studied opponents in detail, spent hours analyzing film. When younger players made mistakes, he didn't reject them, he explained, but at the same time, he expected the same obsession he carried himself. If someone wasn't willing to give everything to preparation, Lewis sensed it immediately. Over time, he became a bridge between coaches and players. He understood tactics, yet could still speak the language of the locker room. He could connect strategy with emotion, and that combination was his greatest weapon. He wasn't just a physical leader, he was the mental center of the defense. His style of leadership was intense, spiritual. He often spoke about faith, about higher purpose, about how every player carried responsibility not only to the team, but to family and city. Some saw it as theatrical, others as authentic. But one thing was certain, no one was indifferent. In the years that followed came more Pro Bowls, more All-Pro selections, more dominant seasons. He wasn't a one-season player. He wasn't a short burst of form. He was consistent for more than a decade. And in the NFL, that may be the greatest measure of greatness. Defenses change, players leave, coaches rotate, but Ray Lewis remained the constant. Every year he adapted his game, learned new systems, responded to the league's faster offenses. The physically explosive young star gradually became a more experienced, more tactical veteran. He might no longer have been the fastest man on the field, but his reading of the game was better than ever. Meanwhile, Baltimore built a reputation as a hard, uncompromising team. When opponents traveled to their stadium, they knew a physical battle awaited, and that identity was embodied by Lewis. His presence changed the atmosphere not only for teammates, but for opponents too. He became a symbol of consistency in a league where careers often end faster than they begin. Every year he proved his dominance wasn't luck. It was the result of work, discipline, and a mentality born in childhood. And yet time slowly began to show that even he wasn't immortal. A body that had endured hundreds of violent collisions started to carry the marks of wear. But his mind, still sharp, in that very combination experience, intensity, and refusal to step aside would push his story into another chapter. Time in the NFL is merciless. It doesn't matter how many Pro Bowls you've made. It doesn't matter how many tackles you've recorded. Every year, younger and faster players arrive, and the body remembers every hit. Ray Lewis was used to playing through pain. That was part of his identity. Bruised shoulders, battered ribs, inflammation, all of it belonged to the reality of his position. Linebacker isn't a role for someone seeking comfort. It's a position of collision, constant contact. But around 2012, it became clear that time was starting to collect its debt. In October of that season, during a game against Dallas, he tore his triceps, an injury that for many players means the end of a season and often a career. In that moment, there was silence. Fans knew what it meant. Lewis was no longer young. He was 37 years old, an age in the NFL when most players are already watching games from the couch. The surgery was successful, but the real question was different. Would he return at all? And if he did, would it still matter? For someone else, it would have been the logical moment to walk away. Injury, age, a career already worthy of greatness. The Super Bowls, not yet only one, but a legacy already secure among the legends. But Ray Lewis never functioned according to average logic. On January 2nd, 2013, he announced that the 2012 season would be his last. He returned before the cameras, but this time, he wasn't aggressive. He wasn't theatrical. He was calm. He said it was time, that his body had spoken loudly enough, that he wanted to leave on his own terms. That message hit the locker room differently than any pregame speech ever had. Suddenly, it wasn't just a season, it was a final ride. Every player knew he was playing the last chapter with the man who had defined the organization. In Baltimore, he wasn't just a veteran, he was the symbol of an entire era. When he returned to the field after rehab, just before the playoffs, the stadium exploded, not because he was the fastest, not because he had the best statistics, but because their leader was back, the man who had led them for more than 15 years. It was clear his body wasn't what it once was. He didn't run as lightly. His movement wasn't as explosive, but his experience, stronger than ever. He read the game with surgical precision, and his presence changed the atmosphere of every snap. Suddenly, it wasn't only about winning. It was about finishing the story, about whether a legend would leave quietly or with one final roar. The 2012 playoffs were not ordinary. This wasn't just another postseason. It was a mission, Every player in the locker room knew this was the final chapter of an era. Ray Lewis had already announced the end. Every game could be his last, and that changed everything. In the locker room, he spoke differently than ever before. There was less aggression, more awareness of the ending. He spoke about legacy, about how football isn't just a game, but a chance to leave a mark. Younger players listened more closely than ever. They knew they were standing beside the man who had defined their organization. Baltimore's path was difficult. In the divisional round came a dramatic game in Denver. Freezing cold, high altitude, and a moment that changed the entire postseason. Joe Flacco's deep pass late in the game sent it to overtime. The Ravens won, and the locker room afterward felt different, like something had shifted, as if fate had written the first line of a fairy tale in the conference championship. They defeated the New England Patriots. For many, it was a symbolic moment. The team that had stopped Baltimore in the past had now fallen, and Ray Lewis stood at the center of it all. He might no longer have been the fastest, but his presence carried weight. Every tackle in the playoffs felt like a reminder that the legend hadn't spoken his final word. And then came Super Bowl 47. The opponent was the San Francisco 49ers. The irony of the story? The opposing head coach was the brother of the Ravens coach. A game filled with emotion even before kickoff. The first half belonged to Baltimore. The defense played with discipline. The offense was efficient. It seemed the ending would be smooth. Then the power outage came literally. The stadium fell into darkness for several minutes, and the game changed. San Francisco fought back. Suddenly, it wasn't dominance. It was drama. One final drive, one final defensive stand. And right there, in those last seconds, the ending of his story was being decided. The Ravens stopped the attack at the goal line. A 34-31 victory. The second Super Bowl in franchise history. And for Ray Lewis, the perfect farewell when he lifted the Lombardi trophy. It wasn't only about the title. It was the closing of a circle from poverty in Bartow, through the dark night in Atlanta, through the historic 2000 season, to a fairy tale ending. He left as a champion, but something else mattered even more. He left as a player who would be spoken of as one of the greatest linebackers in history. Statistics place him among the elite. More than 1,000 tackles, to championships, a Super Bowl MVP, 13 Pro Bowls. These aren't just numbers. They are consistency across nearly 2 decades. His place among the greats was confirmed later when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, an official stamp on a career that was anything but ordinary. Ray Lewis was not perfect. His story has dark chapters, and that is precisely why it is so powerful. It isn't a clean fairy tale. It is the story of a man who passed through pressure, controversy, pain, and triumph, and he walked away at the moment when the world once again saw what made him a legend: intensity, faith, and the ability to lead when it matters most. Yet with Ray Lewis, it was never only about statistics and trophies. The moment he retired, the debate that had followed him throughout his career returned. Can a legend also be a controversial figure? Can someone be a symbol of toughness while still carrying the shadow of the past? For some fans, his name will always be tied to that night in Atlanta, regardless of the court's outcome, regardless of the sporting success. For others, he is the example of a man who made mistakes, endured the hell of media pressure, and still built a Hall of Fame career. And it is precisely this tension that makes his legacy complex. Sports often love clean stories, a hero without stain. Ray Lewis was never that. His story is full of contrasts, deep faith and a dark chapter, extreme discipline and one chaotic night, a perfect ending to a career and constant questions from the past. But if we separate emotion and look purely at the game, his place in history is difficult to challenge. More than 2,000 tackles, to Super Bowls, MVP of one of them, 13 Pro Bowls, 7 first-team All-Pro selections, Defensive Player of the Year, 17 seasons of consistency in a league where careers often end after 5, where the greatest linebackers of all time are discussed. His name is always part of the conversation, not only because of numbers, but because of impact. He defined the role of the modern middle linebacker, a combination of speed, intelligence, and the voice of the defense. A player who wasn't just part of a system, he was the system. Then came 2018 in Canton, Ohio. He entered the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The gold jacket, the applause, family in the stands, teammates, former opponents. In that moment, another circle closed. When he stood on the stage and spoke, he was no longer the shouting warrior from the tunnel. He was a man reflecting on his journey, speaking about pain, responsibility, and how greatness is not only about victories, but about how to respond to falls. The Hall of Fame is not only recognition of performance, it is confirmation of influence. And Ray Lewis had that influence on teammates, on the Baltimore Ravens organization, on an entire generation of defenders who came after him. His legacy is not simple. It is not black and white, but it is powerful dot, and that is where his true greatness lies. When Ray Lewis left the field for the final time, he didn't disappear from the public eye. His energy was too strong to fade. He gradually appeared as a television analyst, a speaker, a mentor. The microphone replaced the helmet, but the intensity remained the same. When he talks about football, he doesn't speak only about schemes and tactics, he speaks about mentality, responsibility, character. His pregame speeches went viral long before the TikTok era. Even today, young athletes return to them as motivational clips. His iconic entrance, the dance, the outstretched arms, the scream toward the stands became a symbol of an entire NFL era. It wasn't just a marketing moment, it was an image of who he was, a man who lived every second of the game to the fullest. Ray Lewis's cultural impact goes beyond statistics. He defined what an emotional defensive leader could look like. He showed that a linebacker could be a tactician, a preacher, and a warrior at the same time. Generations of players studied his game, his preparation, his reading of offenses, his approach to training. But like his career, his legacy is complex. Ray Lewis is not a simple story about a perfect hero. It is the story of a man who had a dark chapter and still built sporting greatness. The question is not whether he was flawless. The question is how he faced his flaws. His life shows one essential truth. Greatness is not the absence of falling. Greatness is the way you rise after the fall. Today, when fans speak about the identity of the Baltimore Ravens, his name is still the first mentioned even after years. Even after changes in coaches and players, he remains a symbol of toughness, discipline, and the belief that a defense can be just as dominant as any offense. And perhaps that is why his story resonates beyond NFL fans. It is a story about pressure, responsibility, and the reality that every person has moments that can define them but don't have to destroy them. Ray Lewis was not just a linebacker, not just a Super Bowl MVP, not just a Hall of Famer. He was a man who showed that legend is not born from perfection. It is born from intensity, from work, from the willingness to face your own demons. And the question he leaves behind is not how many tackles he made, but whether you can live with the same passion he brought to every snap. Because in the end, his story isn't only about football. It's about what you do when the world is watching and when it is judging you at the same time.